Let's make a couple of 1870s toddler bustle dresses. Good day everyone, my name is Caitlin. I'm a living historian who educates other living historians by teaching old-fashioned sewing skills and copying original garments. We are doing an 1870s event, mid-1870s event, in a couple weeks. And we have a family who, the father does a lot of living history, but the rest of the family doesn't. And so we volunteered as a group to kind of make clothes so that they can come and join us today. So they can join us for this event. It's gonna be a really hot West Texas event in July. It's gonna be interesting. Anyway, I did volunteer to make the little girl clothes. So last time we made her underwear, and I was going to make her only one dress, and then I bought fabric for it with one of fabric for me as well. And it's not in yet, and I don't feel super confident right now that it is going to be in. If the other fabric doesn't come in on time, we're making one dress. But I have a ton, like I have 15 yards of this linen. And I have two original dresses that I really like, that I would like to copy. And so I think one happens to be a plaid. So I pulled this out. I think it'll be nice, light, and cool to be worn. And we can make that dress. But yeah, let's go ahead. I have this. I am working on getting a pattern drafted, and we will go ahead and make this dress. Okay, so I wasn't filming this because usually I don't film my drafting process, but I thought this would be of interest to people. So, pull my pieces. Here is my regular bodice pattern that I drafted. There's front and back. What I want for this particular gown, this plaid one, is I want a yoked bodice. I feel like my light has gone out in here. I don't know why you're seeing more shadows. Oh, one of my bulbs is out. I'll fix that later. Anyway, so yoked bodice has something that is, the front part is very plain, like it's just plainly set fabric, and then you have a gathered or pleated part on the bottom. And I know I've shown how to do this before, but just as an updated how I do that. So if I don't have a pattern for a yoke bodice and I want a yoke bodice, so I have my plain bodice pattern here. What I did is I took and traced along here. This is my front, so this is the exact same thing, right? So I traced along here and along here, and I decided where I wanted that yoke to go. So I decided an ending point, and I decided an ending point here. Now the original actually has it kind of going down to a V a little bit, so I did that on this, but you can make it straight across, that's totally fine. Just kind of depending on what you want. And then I added a seam allowance to that wherever I wanted it in. So this already has a seam allowance on it, and I cut it out. So that's my plain part. But now I have to do the bottom part. And of course you want this to be much larger, much longer than this is. So what I'm going to do for this, I'm going to start with over here. I'm going to cut myself a throwaway pattern piece, essentially, where it is. I'm going to need a seam allowance over here. So I'm going to start at a seam allowance width away, trace around. Okay. And yeah. Fold this over. We're going to cut this out. So now if I put this and this together and overlap them, that seam allowance, I should have the exact piece of my pattern. Alright, I'm going to put this to the side. I like the part with the grid because it makes this a little bit easier, this next step. You're going to need some tape. I like to use tape for this. And let's see. I will start cutting up my pattern piece. And how far apart you make them is completely up to you. I want mine between 2 and 3 lengths, I suppose. So if I wanted it twice as wide as the normal pattern piece, I would add an inch for every inch square. If I wanted 3 times as much, I would do 2 inches for every inch square. So 2 inches of tape for every inch. This is about 1.25 inches. And it's best to do this on something you don't care about the finish on. And when I come to this side, I'll put tape on the back too, and that'll just keep the tape from making a big mess. And on this side, I'll just fold this over. There, like that. And that way it's not sticky. And if you need to, you can always trim that up later. But yeah, this is what our pattern piece is going to eventually look like. So I'm going to continue. Now sometimes under the arm I won't gather it, I'll set it plainly, and sometimes I will gather it. What I'll probably do is just do one right in the middle and only make it half as full in the near the under of the arm. So here I'll cut right up here. Now if I want to, I can just cut this again, or this can just be my new pattern piece, which is usually what I do. And I get to do the exact same thing for the back over here. That's how I make yoke bodices when I don't have a pattern for a yoke bodice. And you can do it without the grid paper. I just find the grid paper a little bit easier, but you can absolutely measure out, you know, ½ inch or inch or whatever, however much you want to mark it. Alright, I am doing something that it's not best practice, and that is I am not creating a mock-up from this pattern that I literally created out of my head looking at a picture. Ideally, you wouldn't be cutting out of your own fabric, you'd be cutting out of a mock-up. I have been doing this long enough where I feel pretty confident in my decisions, which doesn't really mean anything, but it also, I have, again, like 15 yards of this fabric. So if I mess up, I'm not terribly worried about it. But it is generally best practice to do the first one in a mock-up. It feels so weird to make these tiny little toddler skirts, because even infant ones, you know, are super long. I think I've remarked that my infant ones are actually as long as I make my 19th century skirts sometimes. And so some of these tiny skirts just looks wrong to me. I did double check the sleeve because I'm used to sleeves being cut on the bias. And I double checked, this one definitely is not. You can tell because of the plaid. I thought it would look cute on the bias, but I think in the 1870s really when we stopped putting sleeves on the bias, because it is more common in really the 1820s at least through the 1860s to put your sleeve on the bias. It just helps with movement and the laying of the sleeves, especially for, you know, tight sleeves. Now I am going to line the bodice. I thought about not lining it. I decided I'm going to line it. Especially with these yoke bodices, sometimes they look better with a lining. And I'm going to cut my lining this exact piece, which makes it really easy when I go to gather or pleat this part of the bodice, because I'll have a guide of where to put it to make it fit the right size. So with this type of thing, it's easier to cut a lining out of your regular bodice pattern. Doesn't mean you have to, but I just find it easier. What's the best way to cut bias from here? There's a lot of bias on the skirt, and I think I want at least 2.5 inches, if not 3 inches. Go just under 3. I'll be cutting bias for the next foreseeable future. This is the lining portion, so there isn't a lot that I need to cut of lining. It's just the sleeve and the 2 bodice pieces. Alright, I'm going to start with the skirt on this one. And because these aren't actual panels, they don't have the selvage, I'm going to have to finish each and every seam. I think we're going to do just a hand whip stitch. Linen likes to ravel a little bit, so it's going to be needed. Center back, I have the opening. I just cut a little slit, and I will need to have this hemmed. which I'm doing something a little bit unconventional. I haven't seen this on the hem of a skirt, but I have seen it on other types of hems, which is where you're covering. So this is the front side of the dress, right? On the front side of the skirt. I have the little bit of the hem lifted up. So this is on the right side of the fabric. I have this raw edge, so that this is the wrong side of the fabric. And I'm using my trim to cover that raw edge. I did change the thread. It is now black. To be on the edge so that it stays on, but without going too far over, because you don't want to see any of the dress fabric underneath this. You want this to be the hem. Going to stitch on the top part. Typically with this type of thing, you don't want to sew on both sides because the trim lays better if you only sew it on one side. But because it's on a skirt, I felt the need to do it on both. I'm thinking with the other ones we might be able to get away with doing it only once when we do the rest of the trim, but I think this one has to be done twice, just to make sure everything stays in place. I don't think I can finish the skirt trim yet because I want to make sure it looks right with the overskirt. So I'm going to work on the overskirt real quick. So this is the front part of the overskirt. And I have trim. So first I'm going to mark the center, and I'm also going to mark quarters. I've already folded up a little bit to give myself some pleats on the sides. So we're going to start with this up here, find the quarter mark, put it in the right spot. And I definitely want the center of what's going to be this ruching. I want it on this turned up bit because I want to hem this down at the same time. I want to make sure it's all in the same seam. I would like to make sure it's all in the same seam. I only put one gathering thread, so I have to be very careful to make sure I don't snap anything. Otherwise I have to do it all over again, which is never fun. I'm doing about twice the fullness, which is fairly full for this time period. I think for the 1870s it would be more common in the 1860s, but we're not doing the 1860s, so we can do a little bit fuller. So the ruching is going to be twice as full as this. That's about the right fullness. So now I have to distribute everything, make it all nice and even. And once I'm more or less there, then we'll pin everything in place. And this is going to get a little bit of the velvet ribbon on there as well. And I did not finish the edges of this ruffle. I find with bias cut ruffles like this, they're not always finished. I thought about pulling out my pinking machine, and I just decided this was so small and so full it wouldn't really be noticeable. I only want to sew this once. I'm not sure if I want to just go straight down the center and try to keep it as even as possible, or if I should try to go on an edge. I think I'm going to try down the center. Okay, we are back to working on the skirt. I've been flip-flopping this entire project. Not sticking to one part and finishing it, just going back and forth. So I got the front part of the overskirt, I suppose, which you saw. I've not done the back part yet. I just decided to go ahead and put this on the mannequin, put the overskirt on the mannequin, and measure where I wanted this. We're only going to be able to fit one on here. So I'm going to keep the other, the rest of the bias that I have. And again, maybe we'll make a second one for an older child down the road that can fit and actually really copy the original. Anyway, I'm sewing this on. making sure it's all nice and everything's attached. So it's really sewing on the velvet and also the bias at the same time. So that is the skirt. I do have the top part already gathered, well, gauged in the back and then pleated in the front because I needed to do that to get it on the mannequin. So that part is done. I'm thinking I'll leave the skirt here because I cannot do anything with the skirt until the bodice is done because this isn't being attached directly to the bodice edge. Well, I guess what I can do is get rid of all these threads that need to go away. So I guess I'll do that first. All right, so I'm gonna start with the bodice. I have a good bit of it put together. When I'm doing pleats or gathers not as much, but with pleats especially, I find pleats work really well if your bust and your waist are closer in size than mine are. I attempted to do this at one point with one of my bodices. It did not turn out well, so I ended up having to gather it. But for children's, I really like the look of a pleated yoke bodice. I do suggest doing a fully lined bodice if this is your first time doing this because you can match the waist pleats with your lining. Now with the child's, because their bust and their waist is usually the same size, it's not that big of a deal. But if you're perhaps working on a young adult or an adult and you want to do this, I would suggest doing the full lining because it's easier to make sure it all fits. So this is the yoke part, the front part. And this is the part where we're pleating in. So if I fold this out like this, I'm going to end up, yes, okay, cool, with a right and a left bodice. It's always helpful. And how much you pleat or, put under or whatever, what the size of your pleats is going to depend on how much extra space you left when you did the patterning. Because the bust and the waist are the same on children, I can pleat the entire thing at once. It's also very helpful to do this like iron on an ironing board somewhere where you can fairly easily. Now I can flip that up and I have a bodice piece. Now the full lining comes in really handy when you have a waist that's smaller than your bust because then it's easy to get to this size that you need. Very independent in a couple places after kind of pulling it taut. And now for this, which there's another pleat under the arm. And now that I have this whole piece put together, I get to attach it to the rest of the bodice. Which at this point we can treat it like a regular bodice. It just has a lot more pins in it because we're trying to keep the pleats in place because nothing is sewn yet. Well, I suppose these are sewn, but I like to keep everything together. At this point, usually our first step for a bodice is sewing the side seams and the shoulder seams. Now we're finally at the first step of a regular bodice. So sewing those 4 seams and then we get to basically finish this off. Very quickly before we put it together, there is trim across this front bit. I could have done it before I put the lining on, but it's just as easy to do it after. And I haven't seen the original, so I don't know which way she did it. I did make this bodice a little bit bigger than the waist measurement I need, so I'm going to put ties in the waist and in the neck. That way it's going to be a little bit of an adjustable gown. So I am binding both the waist and neck. It's just a little bit of leftover bias. I got stitched in my machine, turned under, doing a hem stitch to get all of this nicely set in, and we'll use a bodkin to put in the ties probably at the end. I usually like to put on the skirt before I do that. If I do it before, there's always a chance that I catch the ties with my needle and thread when I'm trying to put in the ties or when I'm trying to put in the skirt, which obviously is not good. The sleeves that we're putting in are going to be puff sleeves. I'm using the same pattern that I used, I guess it was 2-3 months ago when I made the two little girls' dresses. Mary's had a double puff sleeve, so it's the same pattern. I just made it a little bit smaller because Mary was 5, and this one is for a 3-year-old. But even though that was a double puff and this is a single puff, it is the exact same thing. I just don't have to do the step of where I make the double puff from the puff sleeve. But here's the sleeve. So with a double puff, what I would do is I would put a little stitch down here, and then it would be, you know, a double puff. But with a single puff, I don't have to do that. It just gets to stay like this. And I did put a little bit of the trim on the bottom to hide that loveliness. So yeah, it's just a little puff sleeve. Putting in a sleeve, and I prefer to sew sleeves in by hand. That's just personal preference. You see it even on machine stitched garments of the time period occasionally, but you can absolutely do this by machine as well. So I just go all the way around just like this, taking out the pins, of course, as I get around. And then that will be the bodice. This is the last step with the bodice. Again, other than putting in the ties, which again, we're not going to do until we attach it to the skirt. So because we have the skirt already done, I can go ahead and attach them. And then we can put in ties, have this completely done, and we will finish the overskirt, which just needs the back done, and then the whole thing needs to be put to a waistband. And this will be the last step for the dress before we move on to the overskirt. So there's gauging in the back and there's pleating in the front. I think I gauged about half of it and pleated about half of it. And when I'm sewing pleats, I find it best to grab all the layers, because if you don't, they flop around and they get annoying. And they don't ever look as nice and neat. So grabbing not only the edge of the bodice and the front of the skirt, but also the pleat behind as much as I can. And it's basically the exact same thing as putting in gauging. It's just you don't have the little pleats to gauge how far apart your stitches ought to be. But I like to try to make mine about the same as if I were doing gauging. It just seems to be more secure that way. But from the front, we see this for the gauging. Very nice and neat. And that's for the pleating. There's still just enough space in that waistband to put in a tiny bit of a tie. All right, let's put in a tie. Just using a bodkin to get this in. Okay, this one's actually easier than the waist. This is the neckline one. All right, dress is done. Let's finish with the overskirt. All right, here's the back bustle and more of our trim. And we're going to stitch it down just as we did before. Hoping to catch everything. Now it's just a point where we get to attach this to a waistband. All right, with a waistband attached, I have, again, bias front waistband, straight cut back waistband, that way it doesn't stretch. And the original looks like the waistband is top stitched, so that's what I'm doing now. Once I turn this corner and go just a little bit more, we will have the last of the machine stitching. There we are. So now I have handwork to do. So it's not too much. There's a couple of loose threads I need to tie up around here. And then we are going to need to do a closure, which I think I'm going to do a hook and eye. I decided to open and close this waistband on the side, mostly because I had a front and a back overskirt, and I didn't want to cut the back overskirt in half to make it close out the back. So we're just going to make it close up the front. Or sorry, the side. We're making it close up the side. And so now, I think I have all the loose threads taken care of, I think. There was a lot of them. I think we're ready to try it on. Alright, let's put on our beautiful linen dress. The wall still isn't in. I'm not sure if it's going to be in on time, so that one, if it comes in on time, I'll just make a second video. If not, if it doesn't come in on time, I'll just put the fabric aside and it'll eventually become a little 1870s dress. But this is our dress. I am going to take off the topmost petticoat because when I did the fitting of the skirt, this petticoat just made it a little too floofy, maybe a little too hoop era 1860s, and that's not the vibe we're going for. So we're going to take off this first petticoat, or this topmost petticoat. Hang on. Okay, well, close enough. All right. This turned out so cute. It's adorable. It is a little on the fluffy side for the skirt. Like it's a little full. It's not obscenely full. And I didn't think it was super full, but it looks super full. I think it's just the stiffness of the linen itself. And the waist is a little too big, which I planned on, so I'm glad it's too big because that's what I meant it to be. Stuff under the chemise if you don't want to see it. I find that children's chemises aren't taboo or anything. That's not terribly unusual to see them. But look at it. It's so cute. You can see what I mean. It is fluffy. But I think it's the linen. I don't think it's the pattern. It's probably partially the pattern, but it's mostly the linen. Okay. And the little overskirt. A little belt situation here. Well, that fits perfect. Oh, good. Okay, and that is perfect. That is so cute. I'm going to hide these ties underneath so they're not as noticeable. But that's adorable. I love it. It's probably the fanciest children's dress we've ever made. So cute. Look at it. That looks really good. I think as the linen gets washed and all that, it'll look even better because it'll have this a little bit more droopy effect, which is probably what we want, especially for this fabric. But it all turned out so adorable. And again, I have so much of this fabric. We'll probably be making lots of stuff with this fabric at some point in time. The yoke looks so good. I love a very good pleated yoke. It is unfortunate I do not have the body shape or style for a pleated yoke because I just think they're adorable. I love them. It just looks so flattering. Just not on me. Well, I mean, they don't work on me, so. And I think the velvet just sets it off. I know it's kind of weird. We think velvet is being this such a heavy, wintry type trim, whereas linen is this light and frothy summer, cool, warm weather fabric. So pairing them together seems a little weird, but they work really well. And the velvet trim, it doesn't really add to the, it's obviously not going to add to the warmth or anything, but it's just, I think that black trim, oh, we got our hem pushed over. I think the black trim really sets off the beauty of the plaid. And this is a really pretty plaid fabric. I've had this for years. So cute and frothy and frilly. And it should be shorter on the actual child because this is going mid-calf. And again, this is, I don't remember, from last month. This is my 18-month or 2-year-old mannequin. Both my 3-year-old mannequins are on display. So this is So that's why I had to stuff her out too. So this will be, an actual 3-year-old will be a little bit taller. Anyway, I think that's about it for this video. If the other one comes in, we'll do it next month. If not, we will go do something else. Probably work on the mannequins that I have in the museum. But yeah, that's it for today. If you've enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe to the channel, click that little bell notification so you're notified anytime I upload a new video. And as always, have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here in the next video.